All right, and take it away. So
Hi,
welcome.
John.
Hi, Libby.
Thanks for inviting me to talk to you today.
Thanks for accepting the invitation. And thank you, Ben, also, and everyone.
Well, something, I think would be good to start off with is one, to acknowledge that you and I have a friendship that goes back a while. And one of the things I think you and I connected on really early on is that we're both from here.
Yes. Among the few, yeah.
Yeah. So we chatted a little bit yesterday, since there's so much content and so much to look at about the work you do. And I thought something good, because often right now we are thinking about land acknowledgements and kind of where we are, the land that we're on. Something unique that we could do to start this conversation off is, since we are talking about place, is talk about the work that you specifically have done in your research around the Indigenous communities here, and particularly with First Cow, but you could talk more about how it's influenced other parts of your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic place to start. I mean, actually, and I mean, really, so many things do start there. Yeah, I mean, I am, like Libby, someone who grew up in these parts. My family moved here when I was 8, and went to school here, and have lived out other places as well. But I still really distinctly remember the 4th grade curriculum that I had teaching us about Oregon history, and the whole concept of manifest destiny and the sort of settlement of this area. And I remember even then, like in in 4th grade, being like, that sounds weird. That sounds like a strange way of telling the history of this place. And like, I mean, there are ways in which the argument I've been having with my 4th grade curriculum has like basically been my entire career,
Right.
The just to start with the most recent thing, yeah, with First Cow. The First Cow, for those of you who haven't seen it, is a film that takes place in the Oregon Territory in like the 1820s. It's before, not only before statehood, but before like the mass migration of the 1840s. And it's an interesting time for me, like as a local person, in that it's there's a corporate European presence in the Hudson Bay Company, and there are a lot of different kinds of people milling around in the lower Columbia Basin at that point, but there's not really a state government in that way that we've come to understand it. And so for us, it was really, really important in depicting that time and place, which is incredibly rarely depicted, period. It was really important for us to be as diligent and responsible as we could in depicting the Indigenous culture in that time. So even though the film itself is not about per se Indigenous people, those are not the sort of main characters of it. They do play a role in the film's kind of ecology and system, and it was just really an amazing experience to go and do some of that research and to do some. We were really lucky, so I could just go on and on about this. You've like asked one question.
Well, I'm interested specifically. Yeah.
We were really lucky because literally like a few months before going in and starting pre-production on this project, the museum out at the Grand Round, a new interpretive museum, Chichalu, opened, and with kind of an archive and a whole new institution sort of built specifically for the like education about the people and cultures that existed here, and that continue to exist. And so, I mean, it was just an amazing thing to be able to like drive out there like every, you know, week or two and like talk to various people and sit in their archive and like really um, just get turned on to you know, new ways of thinking about how to depict the people that preceded white settlement. It was great.
And what work were you doing specifically with the Ground Round Reservation?
Well, they we went to them initially because looking for linguistic help, because there is dialogue in the film that takes place in the Chinook language that we ended up translating into Chinook Wawa, which is the sort of trade language that's largely based in Chinook, but like Chinook itself is there's not really anyone who can translate it into Chinook anymore. So we sort of did the next best thing. And so they have a language program that was able to help us do that. And we did a similar thing out at the Umatilla Reservation on a previous film called Meek's Cutoff. And in both of these films, we have untranslated indigenous dialogue in the film that is, to me, just like a really exciting thing to be able to present on film, because you never see that really in fiction films in particular. And you know, as a writer, just to like be able to present like languages that are in some ways pretty precarious at this point, and to see them represented and have them on film, like, to me, is a very thrilling idea. So we initially went out there largely for language help, but it ended up sort of becoming a much more holistic sort of conversation. I mean, they ended up really, it was a really lovely thing to do kind of in pre-production, because there was a sort of a generosity and a spirit to the conversations we were able to have that I think established something for the whole production going through the whole way. And so we ended up, you know, there were costumes that were that they helped us with. They ended up, you know, renting us numerous canoes and stuff, and just really, I feel like you know, keeping us as much like, I want to be clear too, like, it's we did this and take full responsibility for it. There's no official like help that anyone gave us out there. Like, it was not something, this is no one at the Grand Round was like, this is, you know, we give you our thumbs up approval or anything, but they were incredibly helpful in helping us find our own kind of way of depicting it in a way that was, you know, beautiful and responsible, I think, as far as yeah.
Well, I mean, I just think a lot about the work you do specifically is so much of this place, and every aspect of it, whether it be your writing, your historical writing, your research writing, your screenplays, your short stories, your art reviews, are really looking at the Northwest. So, so it felt important to also say that, like, in your work, you are thinking about the First Nation and like the first people here, and how kind of we've evolved from that time. So it is interesting also when I think about the more like with Meek's Cutoff and First Cow, that of course that's a layer of this environment. That's a layer of your writing.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting thing. I mean, as someone growing up here, I mean, it's something you understand is there. I think it's something you feel in the sort of earth, but it's also increasingly amazing to me how little public visibility there, and how little sort of public recognition of this multiple millennia of human history like exists here.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, even, yeah, I mean, it continues to really amaze me. Like, the more I learn about how developed and how like profound of a culture existed in the Lower Columbia, and that then, you know, you could easily yeah, that just has so little public space now.
So when you say we meet, obviously it means you and Kelly Reichardt, the director, are going to these places and doing this research together. I'm curious also because I've known you now through a few of these projects, what your process is together, because often you're working with a story you've already written about this place. A few questions. How did you guys begin working together? And do you feel like in that process you helped Kelly kind of see this place as also somewhere she wanted to focus on and make work in, or how did that relationship
Yeah.
work?
Okay. Yeah. So this is a whole other like history to tell. So yeah, the films that I've done are I've been incredibly blessed to have a relationship with this film with a director named Kelly Reichardt, and we've done 5 films together at this point. And our friendship, we were introduced through a mutual friend, Todd Haynes, who's also a filmmaker who lives here in town. Kelly, yeah, we had kind of encountered each other and been friendly, and Kelly at a certain, like back in 2004 or 5 or something, had a small amount of money that she was wanting to use towards feature film. And so she was looking for something to adapt. And so she had actually read a novel of mine called The Half-Life, and asked if I had something available. And I had like one short story at that point called Old Joy. And it was a very simple story of 2 guys taking a walk in the woods and having a kind of mystical hot tub experience. And I don't think there's like another filmmaker that would have seen a feature film in this like actually quite slight, naturalist short story. But she did, and she went off and made it, and it took place here in Oregon, and she shot it here. Both of us were living in New York at the time. And it was kind of in the process of making that film and the conversations that we were having that, yeah, I think we just recognized that we liked each other, and it was just sort of a conversation that now has been going for more than 15 years, which is really, I mean, it's really an incredible thing in my life. And as far as the process goes, yeah, the first one was based on a story of mine, and then the second film we did is called Wendy and Lucy, and that was based on a short story that I wrote sort of specifically for Kelly. Because I still didn't really understand where the whole relationship was going. Like I just didn't understand Kelly's willpower or drive or a lot of people talk about making movies, but like Kelly is a person who actually does and makes really beautiful movies. And so I wrote that one as a story so that I could have it as part of a collection I was working on, and then we kind of adapted it into the film. And then, each project has had its own sort of genesis. I mean, I wrote the Meek's Cutoff script, and it's just, our relationship is pretty multifaceted at this point. I mean, she lives like a mile away from me. Like, I've had children in the time that we've known each other. She's a part of their life. Like, it's we have a lot of interwoven friends at this point. The sort of process of making these films and conceiving them and writing them is I mean, a lot of it has to do with just our daily gossip about our friends and talking about politics and talking about like our families. I mean, it's like it's become a real extension. I at this point I'm fairly certain that if we stopped making movies together, we would still talk every day, like there's just too much stuff.
Like it's the other way around where it's like maybe it's because you talk every day and because of who you are for each other, you kind of can't stop making movies together.
Oh, well, that's a thought. Yeah. I mean,
Like you can help yourselves.
well, I mean, it's just really fun, you know? I mean, I mean, for me, it's fun because I have the easy part where it's like, I just get to sit at home and like think of things. And then like Kelly and the crew has to go off and like do the insanely arduous work of like making stuff and like punishing their bodies and like living in crazy conditions and stuff. But even that's fun for those guys. I mean, the idea of making movies with your friends is just like, I mean, to me, that's like a insane thrill. Like, who gets to do that? It's fucking great. Yeah.
But with First Cow, it sounded like you were going out to set quite often and checking in with everybody.
Well, yeah, First Cow was a fun one because it was all shot. I mean, they've all been shot in Oregon, the ones that we've worked on. First Cow was shot all like within 45 minutes of the Burnside Bridge, basically, because there's like a union law that's like if you, like the Burnside Bridge is considered like the center of town. And if you travel for under 45 minutes, like the travel's not counted towards the workday. So you want to find a set that like allows everyone to like have the full shoot day. So most of the movie was shot, yeah, like in the neighborhood. So it was quite easy to go out and visit. Yeah, but other ones have been less so. I mean, like Wendy and Lucy was also actually largely shot literally a block from my house in the neighborhood of Kenton, because that one was written really with that particular neighborhood in mind. And so I could actually just walk out into the parking lot of Walgreens and like bring everyone a cup of tea during that shoot. But the other ones, like there was one in Southern Oregon, and I wasn't really around for that one so much. And Meeks was Night Moves was in Southern Oregon, and that was shot at like a organic farm that my girlfriend Emily and a friend runs. And so we had been going down to this organic farm for a few years, and there was like a moment where I was like, this would be a good place for Kelly and a camera. Like, this is a nice location. And so, you know, fabricating a story around that spot. But like largely my like work ends with the script, and then it's just, I get to kind of I just get to listen to all the crazy group dynamics, which is really fun.
Yesterday you said that it's arbitrary that you continue to write about this place, but you're so distinctly identified as a regional writer. It can't be arbitrary. What's the deal?
I mean, it's only arbitrary in that, like, if I would have grown up somewhere else, it would have been that place, you know? Like, I feel like it's like there's a kind of, I mean, I think there's a long history of writers, you kind of write about your backyard, you know? I mean, you have access to the people and the histories in a way that you don't have in other places. I mean, there are plenty of writers who write in radically different forms, but there is, I think, an ongoing, like, tradition of a regionalist kind of writing, even when it doesn't name itself as such, you know? I mean, I think you can often kind of learn something about, like where a person comes from has always just been an interesting question to me. And, you know, they're just like, you know, had I grown up in Brooklyn or had I grown up in Tallahassee or something, I would understand more about what goes on in people's houses there and how they talk to each other and what are the kind of, what's the sort of local knowledge of that place. And so I would have probably just cast my lot with that, but this happened to be this happened to be where my family was, you know? Yeah, I mean, it's a committed relationship with all of the complexity of that, you know? I mean, it's not that I just love Oregon so much. I have like mixed feelings, but that's like how a person feels about their home, I think.
Well, your writing expresses those mixed feelings.
Oh God, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
What I liked so much about First Cow, and I remember in the process of you guys making it, just being like, what? It's just a bunch of men in the woods. Like, I don't want to see that, you know? Like, I was like, that's not what I want to see right now. And then showing up and that was after reading Half-Life, and understanding that there was a romanticism to it. But what I really appreciated about First Cow was how you both chose to. It's the first time I've ever seen kind of that time period displayed that way, like not just the brutalism of it, but like the disparity and kind of the what's the word, like just seeing how actually helpless all these undeveloped men were together. I just felt like I hadn't seen that before.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. The one like really bad review that the movie got was by this like kind of right-wing critic for the National Review, the like right-wing magazine, and it didn't even entirely make sense. But he was talking about like how we like hated American masculinity and how this was like an attack on like the American like sense of individualism and bootstrapping and, you know, the sort of basic John Wayne tradition. And I had to say like, yeah, you got it, dude. You're right. Yeah, you know, I love that, and you hate it, you know. But that was, you know, I mean, there's a way. I mean, I feel like with Meeks, like I feel like that was a sort of critique of the Western genre in a way that was like, it was very perpendicular to like the ways that people usually think about a Western. Like it was about a group of people trying to make a decision together and kind of having to live in a community in a certain sense and under incredible stress. Like with this one, I feel like with the First Cow, it's like taking a Western genre and it's almost like 180 degrees. Like, I mean, I feel like it's like, it totally, ideally, like just sort of is almost a just bizarro version of something. And I mean, part of that has to do with just the main characters who, like in the First Cow movie, and this is partly embedded in the book as well. Like the main character is like a wagon train cook, like the guy with like the like triangle and stuff. This is actually a funny thing. This is a local, people will like this locally. Like the original book character was inspired, like, I mean, partly by like all those images of like the bearded cook guy, you know, standing next to the cauldron, calling everyone, serving their food and everything. But one of the main like examples of that was actually a Henry Weinhard's commercial that used to air when I was a kid. The beer, Henry Weinhard's beer, they had like a beer commercial where they had that sort of caricature, that stereotype. But they had then their cute little advertising. It was a TV commercial, and so he calls everyone in, and then he starts talking to everyone like some nouveau cuisine chef. Like, tonight we're gonna have, you know, braised salmon with blah blah blah. And it was sort of a joke. You know, the joke was, oh, look, the old wagon train cook is actually the.
Remember that ad? I totally remember that.
You do remember it, yeah. And again, it was one of those things that even at the time I'm like, that's weird. Like, this is sort of like a homophobic ad, you know, because it was basically about what a swish this guy, this like wagon train guy was, you know, and like, oh, he's so California, and like there's something so gay about it, you know. But that always stuck in my mind, like that would be kind of an interesting idea, like a kind of like, what if you got into that character, and like, what if that person really did exist in the frontier? And so that was a big part of the book. And then in refiguring the book for the film, his sort of main side, or his sort of co-star, whatever, ended up being a Chinese immigrant, a guy who had like ended up in the region because of through the fur trade. And so you end up with these two characters who have appeared in like 5,000 Westerns for a total of probably 4 minutes, you know? I mean, it's like, these are like the people that exist on the margins of the genre, you know? And so in this film, though, they become the center of the story, and it does like just radically refigure like what's important and what's interesting. And, you know, it happened pretty organically, but it was really fun to realize like, yeah, this is, you know, we've just folded this thing in half.
And then also to think about these characters on the margin, amid all of this kind of aggressive machismo behavior, just kind of looking for tenderness in some way. I found that really, really special and unique about that film too.
Yeah, I mean, I think those actors did a really beautiful job of like embodying that stuff, and Kelly gives stuff time to sort of breathe in that way. You know, I mean, there are scenes that I think, you know, it's not like they're saying like, oh, I love you, or I can't quit you, man, or whatever, you know, it's like, but there's just a kind of, a breath to the scenes and the shots where you're like, oh yeah, I see that these guys are sort of like finding each other somehow. And it's, yeah, I mean, it's really remarkable what I feel like Kelly's able to do with her patients. Yeah.
This film was a lot different than Night Moves in so many ways. I wanted to hear more about your process of making Night Moves together.
Yeah. Okay. So Night Moves is like an eco-terrorist movie, and like we were just saying, it sort of germinated in Southern Oregon. We have these friends with an organic farm in the Applegate Valley, which is not too far from Ashland as far as the crow flies, but is it's like a 40-minute drive because it's really inside of this like ravine in the Siskiyous there. And so we had been going to visit that place, like me and Emily and our kids, for a few years. And our friends who live there are like extremely left-wing organic farmers. You know, it's like, and like on the edge of sort of survivalist, you know, not survivalist, but like, I mean, extremely ideological. And I mean, they're great, wonderful, warm people, but it's, and it's
Homesteaders.
practically, yeah. I mean, they built like their own amazing cob house there, and they the irrigation is all like trapped water. They're not like taking water from any sources, and you know, it's a particular lifestyle. The thing that I started to realize that was really interesting though is that like their neighbors, like some of their neighbors were like them, but then there's also some like equally radical right-wing neighbors they had, these like Ron Paul libertarians who were also farming, also like living this incredibly you know, back to the land sort of survivalist lifestyle. And they all, like in some ways I was realizing that the Applegate Valley was like more politically interesting than like Portland, you know, it was more diverse, more like just intense in a certain way. And that there are people interestingly like living really similar lives with like radically different books that they are reading, you know? And it just like became, I was like, this is like an interesting spot. So I initially wrote a story. I started writing a story for Kelly because she likes having the story to kind of like as a foundation. And so I started writing a story that was about an eco-terrorist guy who had, it was sort of a romance between like an intern and a refugee eco-terrorist in this sort of very remote spot. And I wanted the sort of history of this person's crimes to kind of come out in the romance in some way. And it was funny because like Kelly was like, okay, yeah, I like the place and the issues and everything, but she's like, I'm really much more interested in like just cinematically and like depicting the thing that this guy did, you know, like why are we telling the story after the action, you know? Mm-hmm. And so it's like, oh, that's easy. Like I can, like that makes it so much more, it's true. It makes it much more cinematic in some ways. And then you're sort of in genre, you know, then it's like, it's a like thriller. And so that's the way that we went. And so then I wrote a script, you know, I mean, generally like I write this first stuff that kind of establishes the characters and the story structure and the scenes and stuff. And then it just sort of continually gets refined. But in this case, it became a story about a sort of cell of very radical eco-terrorists who blow up a hydroelectric dam and then and then have to deal with the repercussions. And you know, it's definitely, it's got a sort of Crime and Punishment kind of vibe to it. It's got you know, definitely some elements of um, the Edward Abbey kind of stuff, you know. But it was an interesting. It was as all of them. They're really difficult shoots, you know. They're hard for everyone to make, and there was a lot of like suffering that went on in the making of it.
Okay.
But it was. But I feel like it was. I mean, I'm proud of it, and I think it's something that it captures a certain segment of our Northwest sort of culture that is, again, like not often depicted very realistically.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the anarchists were kind of pissed though, like they felt like actually misrepresented.
Oh yeah.
There's like interesting conversations, you know, because I mean, as we know, like anarchists are generally incredibly peaceful people, you know, and some people got really angry that like, or just sort of offended, I guess, that this was a depiction of like what in an otherwise really quite like faithful representation of like eco-terrorists. Like, I mean, they wouldn't call themselves eco-terrorists, like direct action kind of people. You know, there does end up being murder and death in the story. I mean, partly because that's just like part of a thriller, but some people were like, that would never happen. Like, we would never do anything like that. You know, like there's no way that an anarchist would ever murder anyone. And I was like, I don't know, anyone can murder anybody as far as I'm concerned. Like,
Right.
you know.
But I mean, it more captures the fear, the idea of action. Yeah, like actions and consequences, like you
Yeah,
said.
right.
What it means to get caught after being so convicted or having so much conviction to do a thing.
Yeah, right.
The fear that comes in later. I thought that was kind of what that movie was mostly about. I mean, in the theme of being in the Northwest, eco-terrorist action thriller. Sure.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the Dostoevsky thing, you know, it's like there's the crime and then there's the consequence of it, the punishment. Like that was the basic concept.
But yeah, it was definitely very different. It was Night Moves and then Meeks after that?
No, it was Meeks and then Night Moves. So yeah, like I mean, Old Joy, Wendy and Lucy, and Meeks, I feel like in my mind, and probably in Kelly's too, like they sort of form a loose trilogy in a certain sense. Like they're all kind of road movies in very bizarre ways, like sort of aborted road movies or like sideways road movies. I mean, that was part of what led, you know, having done Old Joy, which is about two guys taking a trip into the woods. Then Wendy and Lucy is about a young woman whose car breaks down on the way up to the fishing, the like canneries in Alaska. And Kelly's work even previous, like had to do with kind of American road tropes. And it was kind of after those two had been made, like that's what kind of led to the Oregon Trail story, where I was like, what's the biggest road movie like in this like national history, you know? And like, how can you like torque that like that sort of east to west sort of like onslaught? How can that become like a different sort of thing? So it ends up being about a wagon train that gets lost in the Eastern Oregon desert. But those three sort of, to me, kind of ran off of similar, there's a continuity there, you know. And then yeah, Night Moves is a outlier in a certain sense. And then yeah, First Cow is weirdly a completion because that was based on the first novel that we sort of originally were talking about doing something together. So
well, yeah, it really is interesting that it kind of comes full circle back to one of your first stories and the first thing Kelly read that prompted your collaborating together.
Yeah.
And did you decide just to kind of, because with Half-Life you have, you know, those two stories kind of taking place in unison in the book. Did you guys decide early on to just make it more about the pioneer story?
Yeah, that one was an interesting genesis and like a really charmed one. Um, I see a question just came in. What other Northwest writers do you enjoy and admire? And I will mention our mutual friend Pat DeWitt right now because Kelly was talking to our friend Pat. They had been making a film together, like for a couple of years that was ended up having difficulty in getting cast and getting funded and everything. And so that one had kind of run into some rocky ground when Kelly was like, well, what if we just take a swing at Half-Life, you know? And so it was kind of like this weird Hail Mary. It was like, all right, let's see what happens. You know, we've sort of talked about it over the years. Like she had some time, she had already taken off from teaching in the fall. Like the crew was actually already kind of assembled to make
Under Major Domo Minor.
Domo Minor, yeah. And so it kind of, we had to work quickly because it's like we have to generate something. And so we kind of had a couple talks, you know, where it was like, yeah, could do both, could do whatever. And it really quickly became apparent, like actually the old-timey story, because in the book there's sort of a old-time story. It's a double-chambered story, a novel where there's like the 1820s and then there's like a 1980s story and they kind of interrelate. And so we're like, let's just put our lot with the old-timey story. And then like, in that old-timey story, there's the plot line is actually pretty epic. Like it's about this guy, this Cookie character, the guy with the triangle, who teams up with a friend, and they actually sail all the way to China, to Canton, as part of the fur trade. And then the Cookie character spends 40 years in a Chinese jail, and then comes back with a new friend, this like Chinese calligrapher, and it all sort of ends up back on the ground here. But we were like, there's no way we can have someone sail to China. Like that's just not like within our means. And so I was kind of like, well, they can't go anywhere. Like maybe something can come to them that sort of represents this like emerging global trade network. Cause that was a lot of like the thinking I was doing. And for whatever reason, I was just like, what if it was a cow? What if the cow showed up, you know? And once that happened, then it was just like, yeah, I see how this goes. And like the basic structure and everything just really fell into place. But yeah, so it's just always this interesting process of like narrowing things down. Like, you know, there are things you want, you know, things you can't do. And when they reach some sort of critical mass, like, wow, the structure is there. I can see it, you know? Yeah.
Well, I think also writing under the confines of like adaptive screenplay work is really interesting too, to make a story that considers production expenses.
Yeah, for sure, totally. No, it's like it's a different. Yeah, exactly. It's not anything you want to do. I like having limits. You know, I think it's great.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, totally.
Well, and that's not all of your stories, but it's interesting to think about the work you're doing with Kelly, having to kind of always take that into consideration.
Yeah. And it's great. I mean, I think
produced. Yeah.
Totally. And both of us like small stories anyway, you know, so it's like, it's not like, it doesn't feel like a sacrifice. It's more like, you know, it's like, why don't other people do it this way? It makes it so much better. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
Are we at a good time to start taking questions, Ben?
Sure, yeah. I see a couple of them dropping.
Let's go ahead, and I'm going to pause. I'm going to stop the recording here. So for the sake of this, thank you so very much, John and Libby. Really appreciate it.